Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Trolleyheim with your host, Rabbi Anibal Mas. So glad that you joined me. You're joining me this afternoon to continue talking and studying about Passover, about Pesach, that is coming very soon. So I hope you started your preparation for Pesach. If you haven't sold your chametz, you still have time. Remember to download the form, or you can also complete the form online, and that way you can send it to us. That would be awesome. If you cannot come to the building to do it in person, you can do it online. Welcome, Jerome. Welcome, Jerome. Welcome, Judy. Welcome, Brenda. Welcome, Shelley. And God knows who else. Oh, David is here as well. Welcome, David Grossman. Welcome to the class. Great to have you. So, as I mentioned before, we are going to continue preparing ourselves for Passover, something that is extremely important. It's the beginning of everything for the Jewish people, right? We usually take Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur as the most important festivals. And yeah, they may be the most important ones based on how many people come to synagogue. But without Pesach, wouldn't be Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. Without freedom, we wouldn't be able to celebrate anything. That's why Pesach, according to the Torah, is the beginning of all. Pesach is the most important one. It's the one that will set the foundation for all the other festivals to make sense. So that's one way of studying the holidays, where everything goes related to Pesach. It is more clear with Shavuot, the next one, that it doesn't even have a set date. The Torah doesn't say the date of Shavuot. It basically says the Shavuot is going to be celebrated 7 weeks after Pesach. So you see, for that specific holiday, for Shavuot, the link to Pesach is very explicit. But for the others, it is as well, because as I mentioned, without Pesach, nothing else will make sense. Without Pesach, we wouldn't have the calendar. Remember, we studied this last time. The first, the first mitzvah, the first commandment for the Jewish people was to create a calendar, where Nisan, the month of Pesach, would become the first month of the biblical calendar. Not the rabbinic calendar, that's Tishrei, that's Rosh Hashanah, but for the biblical calendar, okay? A little different. It's not the same. They are not the same, the two calendars. Okay, so I think we can start with the class. If there is anybody else with access to the chat, please say hello. We would love to see you are there. Okay. So to begin with the class, let's start by a quick reminder of when Pesach is. Okay, it's the 15th of Nisan, and then we go there for 8 days, at least outside Israel. So this year is going to be on the evening of Saturday, the 12th of April, 2025. Okay. Welcome, Anastasia and Randy. Welcome to the class. So Saturday, the 12th of April, 2025, allows for either 7 days in Israel or 8 days in the diaspora outside Israel. And here we get into a very interesting thing, because I was talking to some people here in the office, and at least two people here in the office, at least two people are going to go to Israel for Pesach. They're going to be there. And there's another rabbi in town, two rabbis in town, two other rabbis in town, that they are going to be in Israel as well during Passover. So there are a few things you have to have into consideration if you ever decide to go to Israel during Passover, which is the greatest thing, because you don't have to be worried about if it's kosher le-Pesach, if it's not kosher le-Pesach. Everything is kosher le-Pesach in Israel during Passover. So it's a great deal if you can go. But in Israel, Pesach lasts 7 days. But because of your residence, okay, is either in Canada or United States, wherever you're living, uh, then you still have to observe Pesach for 8 days in Israel. So these 7 days in Israel, 8 days in the diaspora is only for people who live there. I hope that's clear. And if it's not clear, let me know in the chat. So, for example, let's put it the other way around. If you're Israeli, you live in Israel, but for some reason this year you want to come to Winnipeg to spend Passover with your family, because you're a tourist now in Winnipeg, you still observe Pesach for 7 days outside Israel. And then on the eighth day of Pesach, you're already eating chametz, while everybody else in your family, because they live in Winnipeg, they still have to eat matzah. It's fascinating. So if you happen to go to Israel during Pesach, it's not that you observe Pesach for 7 days like the Israelis. Because your residence is in Winnipeg, let's say, you are still observing 8 days of Pesach in Israel. And there are special minyanim, special groups to pray, that they are for tourists. They are specifically for tourists. And once you go to Israel, you have to find out what it is. Same for the second Seder. In Israel, they have only one Seder, the first night. In the diaspora, we have two Seders. But if you happen to be in Israel for Pesach, you still have the obligation to celebrate two Sedarim. So where are you going to do the second Seder? Don't worry, if you go to Israel, there are advertisements of those everywhere. If you're staying at a hotel, chances are your hotel will be running one of those, okay? Just you have to figure it out in advance. But yes, Shelly, I hear you. I'm jealous too. One day, my wife and I, we always said that we wanted to go to Israel during Pesach, so we don't have to go through the craziness of all the deep cleaning of the house, changing all the dishes. I'm already stressed just by thinking about it. So if you go to Israel during Pesach, all you do is you, quote unquote, you sell your entire house with everything inside, and you go to Israel, and then when you come back, it's not Pesach anymore, so it's not a problem. So you may want to consider that for next year. It's pretty cool, pretty cool. Okay, so last week we studied about how to prepare your home for Pesach, including the selling of the chametz. Okay, we went line by line over the form that we use here at Shari Zedek to sell the chametz. So if you missed that, please check it out on YouTube. Last week, Torah Lechaim is still there on YouTube, so you can go and review that if you are curious about all the details of that. But now let's move into the Haggadah. Okay, so the Haggadah is a special book that we use to celebrate the Seder that we do at home. Now, if you come every day to any day of the year to shul, you will have a prayer book. The prayer book is called the Sidur. The Sidur. By the way, Sidur and Seder, can you hear it? How it sounds familiar? It sounds the same because they're coming from the same word. Seder means order, because during the Passover Seder you have a specific order you have to follow. And the Sidur is also order because it will tell you the order of the service. Okay, so for daily services, Shabbat services, we use a Sidur to know the order for the service. If you come on the high holidays, the Sidur, the Sidur changes, and we use a Machzor. Machzor is the book for the high holidays, but if you come for Passover, the book is called the Haggadah. It's coming from the word lehagid. That means, lehagid means telling. Why is the book calling the telling, the Haggadah? Because that is one of the most important mitzvot, commandments of Pesach. We talked about a few of the commandments last week. For example, not to have any chametz, and eating matzah and so forth. So that is part of the mitzvot of the Passover. But one of the most important and meaningful ones is the retelling of the story of the Exodus, specifically to our children. So, why is the book called the Haggadah? Because of this verse on the book of Exodus, chapter 13, verse 8, and I'm going to read it for you. Pay attention. Vehigadeta, can you hear it? Haggadah, higadeta, same word. Vehigadeta levincha vayom ha'u leimor. בעבור זה עשה אדוני לי בצאתי ממצרים. On that day, you are to tell, vehigadeta, you are to tell your son. It is because of what Adonai did for me when I left Egypt. So, this is a perfect example of one generation connecting with the next to preserve Judaism and to preserve the spirit of Judaism in the sense, as I mentioned at the beginning of this class, that Pesach is the beginning of everything. Without us becoming free people, we wouldn't have anything else. We wouldn't be able to be Jews. And it's something that it keeps happening on every generation, that we have the same fears and the same dangers that our ancestors have to deal generation after generation, right? To be able to observe their Judaism freely, without fear, without harassment. All we have to do is to watch TV, open the newspaper, and you will see that that's not the case most of the time. We are harassed. We are discriminated. We are sometimes afraid of being visible Jews in the world. So when we come to Pesach, we realize that, hey, this is not new, but listen, my son, listen, my daughter, listen what our ancestors did. Listen to these wonderful miracles. Listen to the relationship they have with God so they will feel secure on who they were. And perhaps we can learn from that lesson and to apply it in our days. At the same time, we also learn about human suffering and slavery and freedom. And we talk about, or you should talk about, modern ways of slavery, of lack of freedom, of multiple peoples around the world that they cannot be free, they cannot express themselves, and so forth. It's a beautiful opportunity. And sometimes you don't even have to go too far geographically. And Pesach sometimes become an opportunity to learn the history of Americas, right? Where if you talk about slavery and things like that, you don't have to go to Asia, to Israel to learn this. You can learn it from the history of whatever you are. I can guarantee you that there will be lessons to be learned about the past slavery, discriminations, and you name it. So Pesach is a very powerful tool to connect generations and to talk about deep and important themes and topics that is up to us to teach our children, because I think that they also our children should learn what are our expectations from them, because the world that we are living right now is going to be their world, and they are going to be the one either extending the issues or finding a solution for the issues that we all face. So it's important to engage the kids from early age into all this. And Pesach is a great opportunity, and the Haggadah is the tool that we have to reach that goal. So, Haggadah is the book, the telling of the story of Passover. Now, one of the most important things, or the most visible things that we have in the Haggadah and in the order of Pesach, is perhaps the four cups and the four everything. I don't know if you notice that everything during Pesach seems to come in groups of four. Actually, actually, everything comes in group of five, but the fifth is always hidden. Look at the cups of wine, for example. How many cups of wine we have? Four. No, we have five. The fifth is the cup of Elijah. Nobody drinks from it. And it's there, so sometimes we forget to count it as one of the four, right? Then we have the four children that the Haggadah talks about four children, and we're going to see it in the we're going to see it soon, the four children. But we also talk about the five children. The fifth is the one that is not at the Seder. So we forget about them, the fifth children, the one that is Jewish and is not even there being the evil one. So we forget about them. But it's not that they don't exist, it's just that they are not there. And also, the four questions of the Seder, they're actually five. But nobody remembers the fifth anymore. And because nobody remembered the fifth anymore, I brought it for you so you will remember the fifth. And maybe you can be the one explaining this. You can be the one explaining this for your Seder. Okay? You can have this moment of showing off because you study with me. And then you can show off and say, yeah, there are four questions, but there are actually five questions. Listen to this. The first time that we learn about the four questions is the Mishnah. Okay? This is part of oral law. So the Mishnah describes the four questions as following. Listen to this. I want to read from the Mishnah. They pour the second cup of the Seder, and the child then questions his father. If the child is not knowledgeable, then his father teaches him. Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol haleilot. Why is this night different from all other nights, right? And then he goes, Shebechol haleilot anu ochlim chametz umatzah alayla ze kulo matzah. Right? On all other nights, we eat both leaven and as well as unleavened bread. So that means during the year you can eat whatever you want. You can eat matzah if you want during the year, but also you can eat bread if you wish. But on this night, we only eat matzah. Fair question, right? Second question. On all other nights, we eat all kind of vegetables, but on this night, we eat bitter herbs. Why do we do that? Third question. On all other nights, we eat meat that is roasted, stewed, or cooked. But on this night, we only eat roasted. And the fourth question, on all other nights, we dip once, but on this night, we dip twice. What is the two dippings? Let's recount. Number one, the vegetable in salt water. Number two, the maror in charoset. So we have two dippings. Now, the Mishnah ends by saying, the father must instruct his son according to the son's intelligence. He begins with shame and concludes with praise. That's why we started Seder singing Avadim Ainu. We used to be slaves, shameful. And then at the end, we end with Hallel, praising the name of God, right? So we follow the recommendation of the Mishnah. But now, look at these questions. You have it in front of you on the screen. You have it right there. Are those really the four questions that we have in the Haggadah? Check it out and tell me if there is anything off there. I'll give you a minute. Use the chat. Let me know if there is anything off. I hope you're typing. Okay. I don't see anything in the chat. So I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to jump in. Look at question number 3. On all of the nights we eat meat that is roasted, stewed, or cooked, but on this night we only eat roasted. That's not part of the modern Haggadah. It was replaced by the question. Thank you, Jerome. Exactly. Question number 3 was replaced for the question asking that in all of the nights we can eat either sitting or reclining, on this night only reclining. Why was that question removed? Well, because we don't eat the Passover sacrifice anymore. When it says there, on all of the nights we eat meat that is roasted, stewed, or cooked, but on this night we only eat roasted, is talking about the Pesach sacrifice, the Korban Pesach, Passover sacrifice. We don't have it anymore because there is no more temple. So that question didn't make any sense because from that day, the day the temple was destroyed, the Passover sacrifice wouldn't be part of the Seder anymore. So it was replaced by the sitting and reclining that Jerome Fomin here is mentioning. So in reality, we have 4 questions, but if we add the one that it was removed because we cannot do it anymore, then we have 5. So the common denominator of the number 5 in the Seder is that the 5th is always something that is not there anymore or we cannot use it. Okay? But mostly it's something that is not there. It's not in the Seder. It exists, but it's not in the Seder. So, for example, the 5th cup is reserved for Elijah the prophet, who is not there. The 5th question is not there because the sacrifices are not there anymore. The 5th child is not there. So that's why we don't talk about him or her. But they're all the other common denominators are things that the day that the world will be redeemed, when the Messiah will come, then the Passover Seder is going to be celebrated now with the number 5. Because Elijah will be there, because the 5th question is going to be added once again, because we'll have the temple, and we have again the Pesach sacrifice, and because with the redeemed world, the child that this Pesach is not there because they don't care about it, they are going to be there because now in the days where the world will be redeemed in messianic times, God will be one, the name of God will be one, and everybody will acknowledge the presence of God. That's why you can explain this in your Seder, that even though we have now everything as 4, in messianic times it's going to be 5. Okay, so the 5th is hidden because we are not experiencing messianic times yet. Okay, you should have that in mind. Let's continue. Now, remember I told you we need the children participating in the Seder. So we have many things to make them ask questions. We want to engage with them. So the rabbis explain, we don't force a child to ask questions. I don't know if you ever tried, if you force a child to ask or whatever. Try to force the child to do whatever, right? It won't go well. So we don't force a child to ask questions, but instead we perform acts that pique the child's curiosity. Kind of reverse psychology here. We may change the regular order of the meal, or hand out candies, or use other creative methods in the hope that the child will ask about their meaning and be prepared mentally and emotionally to hear the story of the Exodus. So yes, this text is encouraging us to be creative during Passover. And that's why, as a result of this, I don't know if you've been following along, following what's going on in the Jewish world for many years now, that every year there is a new Haggadah that is printed. Something novel, something with good new ideas, something that it will help us to engage the kids in a different way. And the fact that every year a new Haggadah gets printed with new ideas and things is because of this. It's because we take this recommendation to heart. And it's very important for us to find ways, because every generation is different, to find ways to engage with the children. So this is extremely important. So what I'm saying is, if you have a Seder every year and you feel that sometimes it's difficult to engage the kids into the order of the service, maybe the problem is not you. Maybe the problem is you're not using the right Haggadah. How do you solve that? Well, it's a twofold solution. Number one, you need to do a little research to see which Haggadah resonates better with your family. And number two, you need a budget to go and buy matching Haggadot for everybody. And this is something that I always recommend, that if there is anybody doing a Seder, do yourself a favor, try to get matching Haggadot for everybody. Because if there is something worse that children not engaging with the Seder, is adults that they are not even able to follow the order of the Seder because they have different editions and the page numbers don't match and the translations are different. So it is a good thing. For example, this year for our family Seder, we are going to be using a different Haggadah, and is a Haggadah that was printed by the families of the hostages in Israel, with reflections, with reading. It's beautiful. We bought the first edition of that Haggadah last year, and there is a new edition this year because after everything that happens, with more engaging readings and things, and it was very meaningful. And our son Ronen, he's 11 now, he was very curious about it and reading and asking questions. So we are hoping to have the same experience this year by we bought this matching Haggadot for everybody for celebrating with us the first Seder. So Brenda, you said something here. Brenda Grossman, you said, I remember that the only Haggadah was the Maxwell House Blue Haggadah. Certainly did not engage children. Well, I never experienced that. Never. Coming from Argentina, we didn't have that. But said that the one that we have at our house, without knowing the Maxwell one, the one we had at our house, probably not much better. Because I remember that it was the translations were terrible, all Spanish. So that's why I guess as soon as I was able to design my own Haggadah, that's what I did. Right? Yeah. Anyway, let's continue. Shelly Chochinov, I don't know when you tried to write there. What was your third word? It was because the computer changed it to stars, because it's probably part of one of the words that we are filtering. Here we have a very strict filter policy on YouTube, so you may want to spell the word so we can see it. Let's continue. Now, let's continue now with understanding what Egypt meant to the Jewish people. And this is something that we don't usually talk about. We talk about freedom, but we don't talk about Egypt. And one of the things that we have to remember about Egypt, that Egypt was actually prophesied to Abraham. And God already told Abraham that his descendants will be enslaved, and then after the slavery, they're going to live there with riches and thing. So this was all in God's plan, and which basically implies that Egypt was necessary, and the suffering of Egypt was necessary, which is theologically very difficult to digest. But Um, but this is something that is important to talk about. And sometimes when you have a piece of theology that is difficult to understand, to accept, to digest, to the best thing you can do is to open up a discussion with other people on the table. So one that usually works pretty well is to try to talk about why was Egypt necessary. It's wonderful to talk with other people on your table about this. So, which is interesting because if you go to the Torah, when the Torah is talking about Egypt, it says, "But God took and brought us out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace, to be God's very own people, as it now the case." Okay. Shelley, you said, could you provide ordering details of the hostage Haggadah? Yeah, I can do that. Give me a minute. I can probably do it right away. Um, no, I cannot see it. If you can remind me after, Shelley, I will. I will send it. I will send it to you. It's I think it's called the Haggadah of Freedom. Oh, here it is. I will share the link in the chat. I don't know if you can. Oh, see if that see if that works. See if that works. It's called the Haggadah of Freedom, so you can also search by that. Okay, so going back to our text, where it said God took and brought us out of Egypt, that iron blast furnace. So what we notice in the book of Deuteronomy 4:20 is that God is referring to Egypt as an iron blast furnace. What does that mean? What does that mean? An iron blast furnace. That's what I wanted to discuss with you. So listen to this. Rashi will say that iron blast furnace, this is a vessel that is used to purify gold. Okay? So, in other words, Deuteronomy is defining Egypt as something, in Hebrew call it Mikur Habarzel, the iron blast furnace, as something to purify the Jewish people or to remove impurities, in other words, because that's what you do with metals. You heat the metal to as a way to remove impurities, especially for gold. Especially for gold, you have to heat it. Gold is very valuable. It has great potential, but it has to go through the fire to become better, to become more valuable. Let's put it that way. So that is Rashi explanation right away, so we understand what the Torah meant. But then listen to this explanation from Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Merkenberg. He will say, Egypt is compared to an iron crucible because God's true purpose behind the Egyptian slavery was to purify the Jewish people of their baser characteristics, just as gold is purified in a crucible. He wanted to remove the base metals so that only pure gold will remain. To this end, many of those Jews who were unworthy died in the plague of darkness. That's a midrash, by the way. That's a midrash. We can talk about this later, right? You won't find it in the Torah that many Jews that they were unworthy died in the plague of darkness. Okay, but it's a midrash. It's a very popular midrash, and only those who remained were chosen to receive the Torah. And it's interesting. It's interesting because even with all this process of purification through suffering, the people who left Egypt, they were still not perfect. And we will see that they failed multiple tests after that. So one might wonder what, you know, what would have happened if they left Egypt way before they were ready to leave Egypt. So yes, it was a process of purification. But then we are going to learn that even the first couple of years of the desert were also part of this purification. Because the first generation that they were 100% ready were the first generation who were born in freedom. Remember that after that generation, the generation of the people who left Egypt, after they failed with the episode of the 12 spies, that they wanted to go back to Egypt, God decided that all that generation will have to die in the desert. And it's going to be a new generation, then they are going to be the one entering into the promised land, and that took 40 years. So the whole process of purification includes Egypt, but it also includes the desert after that. Now, what was the imperfection that the Jewish people carried with them? There are many explanations of that. I wanted to show you one of the most popular one, and that is that even how can I say this? That the imperfection of our matriarchs and patriarchs was passed to the next generations, was carried over. So the imperfection that started with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., will still be in them, and that is the part that will have to be purified. In other words, that we are acknowledging here that our patriarchs weren't so perfect after all. And it was up to the Jewish people to learn from their mistakes and to change those traits on their own lives. And that is something that took all slavery plus another 40 years until they were ready and their faith was solid and so forth. So let's go back to the beginning to try to understand one of the, at least to understand Abraham. What was Abraham's flaw that left a mark on this spiritual DNA of Abraham's descendants? Listen to this. Genesis chapter 15, verses 7 to 8. It says, Then God said to him, to Abraham, I am the Lord who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldean or Chaldeans. I don't even know how to pronounce that. They don't exist anymore, so I can't go and ask. To assign this land to you as a possession. Okay, remember this. This is God's promise to Abraham about the land of Israel will belong to you or your descendants. Okay, God gave this promise to Abraham, and Abraham answered, and this is the flaw, and he said, "Oh Lord, how shall I know that I am to possess it?" So tell me, what was Abraham's flaw here that we are seeing in this text before we go to the next text? Any idea? Did not trust, not trusting. Well, it's not that he didn't trust, but his trust, his emuna, we call it in Hebrew. His emunah wasn't perfect, was flawed. Because God said, I'm promising you, this is going to be yours. And Abraham said, not so sure, not so sure. Which it was something that our rabbis say that it was passed to future generations. So sometimes when we fail in our faith, it's don't feel so bad. This is coming. Even Abraham struggled on his emunah, on his faith. Now, listen to this. Let's go to the Talmud now. How the Talmud explains this. Shelley, you say, but none of us have a perfect emunah. Of course, of course. But once you know the flaw, the issue, then you can correct it. This is the beauty of life. First, detecting what is the issue. Because if you are a person who think you're perfect, then you can never improve. But this is something for us to meditate on it. So, let's go to the Talmud. What the Talmud says about this episode. So it's always good to go to the source. Rabbi Abahu said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, why was Abraham punished by having his descendants enslaved for 210 years in Egypt? Shmuel answered, because Abraham doubted God's credibility in fulfilling his promise. This is reflected in the verse, how shall I know that I am to possess it? Okay? In other words, and this is something that we all, I mean, I don't know what is your level of emunah, but I think we all struggle with this in one way or another. That we say, yes, we trust in God, we believe in God, but not always. Not always. Emunah is believing in God 100% of the time, not 99% of the times. That's the challenge, and that's the difficult part. And it takes a lifetime of struggle and wrestling with ourselves to try to reach that. Some people never achieve it. Of course, some people never achieve that level. But that's what it is. I think the goal is to be able to trust God not 99% of the time, but 100% of the times. And that's for all of us also to learn and to reflect on it during Pesach. Because now that we are gaining our freedom, we have to understand how we got into slavery to begin with. Okay? In the sense that the areas where we don't trust in God are the areas where we will become slaves to something else. So that is something for us to reflect and to think how that happens to everyone's life, because we are all different. We struggle in different areas. But sometimes we get into forms of slavery, addictions, and other things in the areas that the areas that we struggle, areas that we don't invite God to be our guides. But that's something for all of us to reflect during Passover, during Pesach. Now, the Maharal of Prague, famous guy, famous rabbi who created the golem. You may remember the Maharal of Prague because of that. Many people, when they go to Prague, they go and visit the synagogue. It's still around the synagogue of this guy. So, God placed Abraham's descendants in exile because he was lacking in his belief and trust in God. God therefore placed his descendants in exile in order that they would correct this mistake and fully trust in God. They would also see the power of God's deeds for those whom he loves, as well as the awesome power God showed to the Egyptians through the plagues. So in other words, it's, as a slave, when you have nothing, who do you trust? Who is there with you when you have nothing? So this was almost like an exercise to be at the very bottom with nothing. So then you realize that it's you and God. Because when you start having things in your life, power, money, influence, you name it, then that's when we start struggling in our believing God because we feel that we don't need God. Why would I need God if I have money? I have a problem. I tap into my bank account, right? If I need something, I will use my power, my influence, my contacts. So the only time where you can start building up a relationship from God is when you start from scratch sometimes. And the whole idea is uh, we have something like Pesach. So we don't need to go to those extremes because it is something that already happened. So we can reflect about that in our life without sacrificing anything, any of the things we have. We should, and that starts with gratitude, with believing that everything we have, money, power, influence, brains, strength, it's all coming from God. And, and I know it's not easy. When you start having things, lots of things, good things. I mean, when I say things, I'm talking about material things. In your life, when you start having too much of that, it's easier to neglect God. Prove me wrong about that one. I know that I'm wrong about many things, but that one, I'm very I'm very sure what I'm saying here. That sometimes the more we have, the less space we have for God. Just saying. And Pesach is an opportunity to talk about that with your family, with your kids. Now, Rabbi Becher will argue here that the patriarchs and matriarchs were to be the foundations of the Jewish people. We keep praying about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, right? As the beginning of everything, as our inspiration, role models, if you want, role models. The patriarchs and matriarchs were to be the foundation of the Jewish people. Therefore, it was crucial that even the most minuscule personal flaws be rectified, since even a small defect in the foundation can compromise the integrity of the entire structure. So, this is all for us. Miss Janet, this is not from me. Everything I have is from Hashem, one of the 10 remembrances. Very good. Okay, so you are there already. But I said it, and I'm sure that it wasn't overnight that you came to that realization. It's something that we think about, we pray about it. Sometimes we have teachers, mentors, somebody who guide us there, because I believe that to be like you, Janet, to say, to be able to say everything I have is from Hashem, to say that, it takes lots of spiritual guidance in advance. We need somebody to point that out to us. It's sometimes it's human nature. We need somebody. We need our mentors to help us reach that mindset. We do, and because we have all these beautiful scriptures and festivals that they're all supposed to be there to help us achieve that mindset. Everything I have is from Hashem, but we fail to notice it by ourselves. So that's why we study Torah. That's why it's important to study Torah. And it's one of the commandments that we should be fulfilling all the time, studying Torah. You study Torah with me, you should continue other days of the week with other classes. It's very important. Yeah, it's interesting. You had a mentor, so you were blessed with a mentor who opened your eyes. And it's something that I wish everybody will have, a mentor to help everybody to say one day, everything I have is from Hashem, and to mean it. And to mean it. Pesach is one of these times. So, let's continue. Let's move on. Let's move on to the other text. Remember we were talking about before, and I mentioned the midrash, and I also said that I was hoping to have time to study about this. The midrash that the people who were not ready to leave Egypt, they died during the plague of darkness. I mentioned that before. Well, let me tell you the beginning of the origin of that midrash. So we have to go to Exodus 13:18. And it says there, so let me read in Hebrew first because we need that Hebrew word that is in yellow. ויסב אלוהים את העם דרך המדבר ים סוף. והחמושים עלו בני ישראל מארץ מצרים. Now, normal translation. So God led the people round about by the way of the wilderness at the sea of reeds. Now the Israelites went up armed out of the land of Egypt. So in this case, this is a very common translation, Hamushim is translated as armed. Okay? They took weapons with them. That's one way of reading it. But Rashi will explain something very interesting. Hamushin can be understood as being derived from Hamisha, 5. Hamushim, Hamisha, can you hear it? Same root. 5. What? Why? Well, taken in this sense, the verse means that only 1 out of 5 Israelites departed from Egypt. And the other 4/5 died in Egypt during the 3 days of darkness. This is the origin of the midrash that many people died during that day. The word Hamushim, that some rabbis refuse to read Hamushim as armed, but Hamushim as it means that we say Vahamushim alu bnei Israel, and only 1 out of 5 Hamushim, 1 out of 5 left Egypt. And then the question is, so what happened with the rest? We need an answer. So Rashi will say the traditional understanding is they died during the plague of darkness. And I think that has a deeper meaning in the sense that, remember the place of darkness, that it will say there that it was darkness in Egypt, but to the Israelites there was light. They were able to see the positive. They were able to see light when everybody else saw darkness. That means that they reached that level. This is what happened with the person of faith, that even in darkness they can see light. So the Israelites, at that point already of the plagues, they reached that level. But there were some of them, it looks, like they didn't. They didn't. So they were not ready to leave. And that was the end for them, that specific plague, in the sense that they weren't able to they didn't complete the process of purification. Brenda, you said here's a reference to 5 again. Yes, that's what I wanted to mention this, that the number 5 seems to be all around, but we only talk about 4 in Pesach. We reserve the last one for a redeemed world. It's very interesting, the 4 and the 5. Maybe one day I will teach a Kabbalah class talking about the numbers and what every number means something else. And 4, and I will give you just a little bit of a spoiler here. The number 4 represents the material world in the sense that it's still not redeemed. It's just material. It's to us, to the 3-dimensional world. Not necessarily in a bad way, but in a way that is a world with limitations, because it's still a physical world. That is represented by the number 4. Why is that? Again, little spoiler here, because the world before creation was represented by the 1. 1 is God. 1. The number 1 represented the world. When God started the process of creation, the concept of the 2 was created. The first letter of the Torah is Bet, Bereshit, in the beginning. The numerical value of Bet is 2. So duality was created. Duality representing the material world, but in a pure form. And everything that we have around is the combination of different things. So you have the combination of the two with another two, and that is four. So four represents the material world in the sense that we relate to it. Okay? And then again, the five is the number that follows the four. So you're already a level up. I bet you never thought about that. But yeah, you see, this is all Kabbalah, and maybe one day we will have a chance to study that. Okay, but for now, I have to say thank you so much to all of you. To all of you. So thank you for being here. Our next class is going to be already a couple of days before Pesach, and we are going to continue study and preparing ourselves for Passover. So don't miss it. Next time is Pesach Part 3. If you missed any part of this class, don't worry. We are going to rebroadcast this class tonight at 8 p.m. 8 p.m. Central, so you can play it again if you want. But otherwise, we see each other next week. Same place, same platform, same time. So until then, be blessed, stay safe, and hope to see you soon. Bye, everyone.